Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. I'm Ted Yacucci. Well, on November 22nd, 1963, just a few minutes really after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, striking President John Kennedy, over in the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, there was a concession and ticket taker named Butch Burroughs. And you may have heard about Butch Burroughs, and he interviewed a lot of times. But what he saw was really amazing in a lot of aspects because when he saw Lee Oswald arrested and taken out the front door of the Texas Theater, I'm sure that he never dreamed that just 3 or 4 minutes later, he would see another man arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater, taken down and taken out, arrested, and then taken out the back door of the Texas Theater. And Bernard Hare, who owned a hobby shop just 2 doors down from the Texas Theater, also for years and years and years, he saw the second Oswald being arrested in the alley behind the theater, taking out the back door of the Texas Theater, and for a decade or more, he thought that he had seen the only Lee Oswald arrested in the Texas Theater that day. So what's going on? How can there be two Lee Oswalds arrested? And this, I have to admit, is really one of those stories that I'm not 100% convinced that I have all the answers to it. So I'll be looking to you to kind of help me in the aspects of the story where I need a little help, maybe trying to piece the story together. But it's really, really interesting, and it leads to so much, especially surrounding the killing of Officer Tippit. So let's dive right in and see what we can come up with. There can be absolutely no doubt that a second Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the theater and taken out the back door. Here we have a note that is submitted by Captain W.P. Ganaway to Lieutenant Jack Revel of the Criminal Intelligence Section of the Dallas Police. It says on November 22nd, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater, gives the address, and was charged with the murder of President John F. Kennedy and the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit, and it is signed L.D. Stringfellow, Detective, Criminal Intelligence Section. Butch Burroughs will go on to say in multiple interviews that the man arrested at the rear of the Texas Theater looked like Lee Oswald. He said it must have been his brother. Now, what are the odds that in a theater with only, 10 or 12 people, two men will look so alike that people will say they must be brothers or twins? It just doesn't make sense, right? And it wasn't just Butch Burroughs and Bernard Hare, the hobby shop owner, that saw the arrest at the back of the Texas Theater. There was a whole crowd of people out there that saw the second Oswald arrest. So, what happened? Why is there no mention of this second Oswald arrested and taken out the back of the Texas Theater in the Dallas Police Department records? To understand the second Oswald arrest, it really becomes necessary to understand who the Dallas police officers were that took him into custody and drove him away from the back of the theater. Many think that the driver of that car was Captain W.L.Westbrook, and I'm one of them. Captain Westbrook must have dropped off that second Oswald somewhere close to the theater, because Captain Westbrook would then be seen back at the Tippit murder scene in short order with a wallet that he would claim was found at the scene belonging to Lee Oswald, although that wallet would then suddenly disappear and never be referred to again. So the question becomes, what happened to the second Oswald after Captain Westbrook dropped him off close to the Texas Theater? Was he ever seen again? And the answer is absolutely yes, and in very short order. Only about 5 blocks north of the Texas Theater, a mechanic 60 years old named T.F. White had worked for many years at Matt Pate's garage, and he now watched as a 1961 Red Ford Falcon seemed to be speeding back and forth. A few minutes later, the driver parked the car with the engine running in the El Chico restaurant parking lot just across the street. Mr. White thought that was strange and he continued to watch the car. He noticed the driver was wearing a white t shirt. He then walked across the street and approached the car. When White was 10 to 15 yards from the driver's side of the car, the driver looked directly at him and then sped off quickly. White got a good look at the man, he said, and he wrote down the license plate number of the Red Ford Falcon. And that license plate number was PP4537. And later that afternoon, when Mr. White saw pictures of Oswald on television, he told his boss that the man he saw in the car was Lee Harvey Oswald. White's boss, Mac Pate, relayed this story to a local news reporter named Wes Wise, who then contacted the FBI. Wise would later become the mayor of Dallas. Okay, so it's getting really interesting now, right? This is getting good. So we have that red Ford Falcon with the license plate that really is registered to Carl Mather, and it's supposed to go on a 1957 Plymouth. Okay, so what the heck is going on, right? Then it gets even stranger because we find out that Carl Mather's family is extremely close with who? With Officer J.D. Tippett's family. As a matter of fact, an hour after the shooting to an hour and a half, when they hear about Tippett's murder, they go to Tippett's house to console his widow. So, just an amazing set of coincidences. I don't think so. Okay. All right, let's move on. Carl Mather works for Collins Radio. It's an international company in Dallas specializing in radio communications. It's involved in tons of clandestine operations with who? The CIA. And in 1963, Collins Radio, they leased a ship extensively used for electronic and oceanographic research, but the ship is really being used to transport illegal shipments of firearms and munitions to anti-Castro Cuban rebels. So it fits the story perfectly. And at the same time, Collins Radio was building a vast military connections network in Laos and Indochina. So they stand to make a ton of money where in Vietnam. Mather, while working for Collins Radio, was assigned to work at Andrews Air Force Base in Brandywine, Maryland on Air Force Two, the plane used by Vice President Lyndon Johnson. Now, incredibly, Carl Mather will never be interviewed by the Dallas Police Department, by the FBI, and he will not be called before the Warren Commission. How can that be? Not only that, but in 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations did look briefly into the incident, but they offered Carl Mather immunity to testify, and then they never called him. And I think that, again, we can think back of George Ioannidis and all of the influence that the CIA still maintained over the House Select Committee, and we can see why that happened. But all of these things start to really tie in. Now, if you've watched some of my videos, you may have seen my video on Sergeant Robert Vincent, who claims that he was on a CIA charter, a C-54 cargo plane that originated at Andrews Air Force Base, was diverted when an announcement was made of President Kennedy's shooting, and then landed actually in the Trinity River a flat area south of Dallas where it picked up two people, one of them looking incredibly like Lee Oswald, which he determined later that night after seeing Oswald on television. And then the story gets really, really interested in the sense of that Sergeant Vincent then seemed to have his whole career controlled by the Air Force and the CIA for 20 years until he actually retired. And I urge you to watch that video because it sounds incredible, but it's an amazing story. And it really is the follow up to what happened after this second Oswald or this other Oswald was seen at Mac Pate's garage and then took off. So it kind of completes the cycle. But since I did a whole video on it, I won't go into that in great detail right now. Now, just a couple of things to remember about the Texas Theater and Oswald's presence in the Texas Theater, okay? Remember that Lee Oswald, when he was arrested, he had two half-dollar bills on him, okay? Not of the same bill, but two bills that had been torn in half. And that's a fairly obvious indication that they would be matched with someone that he was meeting, so that's kind of the way intelligence agents would make sure they were meeting with the right person. Okay, number one. Number two, it's definitely confirmed that he was sitting next to certain people inside of the theater, obviously looking for someone, and he sat next to a pregnant woman who then got up, went to the bathroom, according to Butch Burroughs, and then was never seen again. Well, think about that for a second, okay? Apparently, she was very pregnant, like 9 months pregnant. Why would a woman like that? I mean, it's possible, but why would a woman who was that pregnant on a Friday afternoon be in the Texas theater watching War is Hell? It just doesn't make a lot of sense unless she was some kind of a contact. So that's another thing, right? And then, of course, we have to work in the whole W.R. Westbrook thing. W.R. Westbrook was really the personnel manager of the Dallas police. He was later outed as a CIA asset. He left the Dallas police and he went to work with the Saigon police, overseeing them as a consultant in Vietnam. And he is someone that, if we follow the story of J.D. Tippit, we realize that he is so involved, along with another man, a reserve officer named Kenneth Croy, that really, really are at the very least questionable in what their actions are all around the assassination. So a lot of things are strange about the Texas theater. Now, one of the things I told you in the beginning, one of the things that I really can't wrap my head around totally is why the second Oswald was actually in the Texas theater. And that's what I'm hoping you guys can help me with. Okay. I believe very, very strongly that after Oswald returned to his rooming house, he went directly to the Texas theater, and he was there after buying a ticket, paying for his ticket by about, a little after 1 o'clock, 1:06 at the latest, way before Officer Tippit was killed. Now, he was obviously, in my opinion, meeting someone that he was told to meet, especially after the assassination. Maybe he had a contact in the Texas School Book Depository. I don't know. But he definitely needed to get to that theater. He definitely thought he was meeting someone there. So if the plan was to kill him before he got there in the school book depository or on the Marcellus Street bus, as I believe was 98% the plan, and he somehow got out of Dilly Plaza and then into Oak Cliff. Okay, I can understand the whole situation with Officer Tippit maybe not wanting to go along with whatever the new plan was. It gets a little complicated. But the one thing I've never been able to really understand is why that second Oswald needed to be in the Texas theater. So if you have ideas on that, maybe it's something obvious that I'm missing. Maybe it's something that we just won't know for a while. But if you could put that in the comments, I would really, really very much appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and put the Robert Vincent story, the video that I did a little while ago, on if you want to go ahead and really get a good idea of Vincent's story and his impressions of the second Oswald and what happened when they flew to Roswell Air Force Base, where the second Oswald got off the plane. So I'll go ahead and include that. Thank you so much for being with me on the channel today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Hi, I'm Ted Yacucci, and thank you so much for viewing the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet and you like the content that you see, I really hope that you'll go ahead and subscribe to the channel. To those regular viewers of the channel, I just wanted to let you guys know I'm exceedingly happy and super excited that I'm finally, this is November of 2024 as I record this, and I'm super excited that I'm going to finally retire from my teaching position at the end of this year. So I'm going to have just tons more time to be able to research and analyze and report and hopefully share information and ideas with you guys as I move on into 2025. I've been looking forward to this for a while because, as you may know, if you've watched some of the videos, I'm interested in all areas of the assassination, as I know you guys are, but I've done independent research in 3 areas. Number one, the Chicago plot, the assassination attempt on President Kennedy just a little bit less than 3 weeks before Dallas. The role that Michael and Ruth Payne played in setting up Oswald as the patsy, especially Ruth Payne, who got Oswald the job at the Texas School Book Depository, and then came up with just tons and tons of very incriminating supposed evidence that made Oswald the perfect patsy before the Warren Commission. And then thirdly, the role that a lot of witnesses played, either intently or without intent, in the assassination, and then were really watched closely by intelligence services, and in some cases lost their lives because I think of what intelligence services thought that they may reveal, especially back in the mid to the late 60s. So they're the 3 areas that I have done independent research on, but as you know, like you guys, I'm very interested in all aspects of the assassination. To anyone that still seriously questions the role of Allen Dulles and the CIA as being the prime motivators and conspirators in the murder of John Kennedy, well, it's my goal to present enough solid evidence and to analyze that evidence and to present it to you to hopefully change your mind. So that's one of the things that I'll be trying to do in 2025. The subject of today's video is Sergeant Robert Vincent, who, if you don't know his story, we're going to get into it in a little bit of detail, but he is a sergeant who was in Washington, D.C. the day of the assassination. He ended up, crazy circumstances, as the only passenger on a CIA C-54 transport where he was trying to get home to Colorado Springs. Right after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, the CIA plane was diverted to Dallas. It landed in a riverbed by the Trinity River. 2 men got on the plane, one of them being identified as a splitting image of Lee Oswald by Sergeant Vincent. And then, consequently, the almost total control that the CIA took over Sergeant Vincent's life for the next 8 or 9 years at least, until he left his military career totally. One of the most interesting aspects about the whole second Oswald situation when it comes to the JFK assassination is really the experiences of Sergeant Robert Vincent. And actually,
his wife also, Roberta, or Bobby as she was known, because she became part of the story as we go on. Let me tell you a little bit about it if you haven't heard of of who Robert Vincent is. He was a United States Air Force sergeant. He was stationed at Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he lived with his wife, Bobby. And he was one of these guys that really was kind of put your head down and do your work, and by all accounts, just a really good guy, a guy that had a lot of respect, not only from his coworkers, but his neighbors and family, everyone who knew him. Well, anyway, after a while of years of working, he was a little bit concerned about not having received a promotion. So he got a hold of his superiors in Washington, D.C., and he was told to report to Washington and have some interviews there. So he did that in the days before November 22nd, 1963. That's how he was in Washington, D.C. From there, it gets really, really interesting because, like all Air Force personnel, they deadhead to wherever they're going, or they get free rides, of course, on Air Force or government planes when they're traveling on government business. So he went to Andrews Air Force Base on the morning of November 22nd, the day of the assassination, but he was told by the dispatcher there that there was nothing going to either Denver or Colorado Springs. No flights that were going from Denver or Colorado Springs where he was trying to get home to. So he told the dispatcher, well, please keep him, in mind if anything pops up. Well, it turns out that before too long, he actually did get paged. And so he went to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher says, hey, there is something out there. It's actually the third plane down in the row as they looked out the window there. And Sergeant Vincent said, you mean that's C-54? And the dispatcher said, yes. So Sergeant Vincent, being very elated, was told that this flight was going to Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado. And that certainly was way close enough for him to be able to grab a quick bus, get down to Colorado Springs, and get home in fairly quick order. So he grabbed his stuff, he walked out onto the tarmac, and right away he noticed something was a little bit unusual. When he got closer to the C-54, he noticed that there was not any United States Air Force insignias or logos anywhere on the flight, which was kind of strange. The only insignia that he noticed was a globe on the tail of the airplane. It was a globe with a colored background, and then it had longitude and latitude lines. He noticed it because it was unusual. He had not seen it before. So anyway, before he gets on the plane, he notices that there is one gentleman in coveralls doing a pre-flight check underneath the plane. Sergeant Vincent walked by him. The guy did not look up, didn't say anything to Sergeant Vincent, so he got on the plane. He was the only person on the plane. There was no one else on the plane. So he took a seat, and after a while, not long, just a few minutes, a second person joined the airman or co-pilot, as it turned out to be, that was doing the pre-flight check. And Sergeant Vincent watched them for a minute or two. Then they got on the plane. But what was strange was they walked right past Sergeant Vincent, walked right past him, didn't talk to him at all, didn't really acknowledge him, which is really, really strange. Usually any pilot in those, or co-pilot in those situations would say, hey, how are you, where you going, and have a chat. It's just human nature and what had always been Sergeant Vincent's experience. Well, anyway, they head right to the, didn't have any, neither of the co-pilots had any maps or anything like that with them. And there was no flight engineer on the airplane. Usually whenever there's a United States Air Force flight, there's always a flight engineer that goes along with it. But anyway, he was happy that he was getting a flight back to Denver, so he was pretty well content at that point. So the pilots, after they close the cockpit door, it's only about 5 minutes before they start taxiing and take off and head west. So Sergeant Vincent thinks everything's going to be good and he's going to be home in just a few hours. Well, what happens is, as we know, President Kennedy was killed at 12:29 p.m. Dallas time on that Friday. Well, at 12:30 on the flight, over the PA announcement, one of the two co-pilots in the cockpit announced just simply, the president has been shot. That's and this was at 12:30. They said the president was shot at 12:29 p.m. And that's all he said. He didn't say where the president was shot at, what condition he was in, what city he had been shot at. None of this stuff. So it was, as you can imagine, it was really a shock for Sergeant Vincent to hear this. Really a shock when you think that he got the announcement, even that little half announcement, really at 12:30 p.m. and President Kennedy was shot at 12:29. It didn't make a lot of sense how he would have been able to have that information relayed to the plane and then to him in that short amount of time. But anyway, as soon as that announcement came over the PA, Sergeant Vincent noticed the plane bank a hard 90 degrees and head south. So he really wasn't sure what was going on at that point, but he knew that they were headed south. And in a fairly short amount of time, an hour or two, he notices the skyline of Dallas. He had been to Dallas many times, so he knew the skyline well. So he saw that they were actually flying into Dallas. But instead of going to any of the airports around Dallas, Redbird or any of the other ones, what this plane did was bank around the city and then come in and actually land in a rough landing along the Trinity River, just about 5 minutes south of Dealey Plaza and the railroad tracks. The Trinity River is down there. There's a riverbed, and Sergeant Vincent said that there was a little bit of grass, and the possibility, he thought at the time, that maybe it was the very beginning of a road that was going to be put in there. He wasn't sure. But that was what his initial thoughts were about where they were landing. Again, a rough landing, but the plane came in, and as soon as they had touched down, he noticed that they were by a kind of a utility shed, maybe 6 by 8 feet, not very big, but a shed where you would probably see construction tools if they were being used on a project. Well, by the shed was a Jeep, a yellow Jeep, and in the Jeep were 3 people. The Jeep, as soon as the C-54 taxied to a stop, the Jeep proceeded over towards the plane. Immediately, 2 men from the Jeep got out and headed towards the plane, right over to the plane. Now, the door on the plane, the door of a C-54 is on the side. It's halfway down the aisle. So one of the co-pilots, again, came out of the cockpit, walked right by Sergeant Vincent, again, didn't say a word or even acknowledge that he was alive, opened the door. 2 men got on, 2 of the men from the Jeep got on the flight. They all walked past Sergeant Vincent again without even looking at him or acknowledging him, didn't say a word. The co-pilot went back into the cockpit. The 2 men that had got on from the Jeep sat in the first seat directly behind the cockpit. Sergeant Vincent would later identify these men as the first man being about 6'1". He thought he was definitely Hispanic looking. Sergeant Vincent thought he was most probably Cuban. And the second man was Caucasian, about 5'7" to 5'8", weighing about 165 pounds. So anyway, that's really, really strange, but again, Sergeant Vincent's in the Air Force. I mean, they don't necessarily ask a lot of questions when in a situation like that, so he didn't ask anything of the people on the plane. And the plane headed west. Again, Sergeant Vincent thought the plane was going to be landing at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver in just a few hours. Well, what happened was it started descending, and he noticed they were going into a runway that he had never seen before, and certainly wasn't Dallas. So the plane comes to a stop. This was about 2 hours after the pickup in Dallas. And all four of the men, the two men in the plane who had gotten on from the yellow Jeep in Dallas, and the two co-pilots all headed off immediately. Again, not saying a word, and headed right off, walked right past Sergeant Vincent and left him on the plane alone. No one else on a giant C-54. He doesn't know whether that they're coming back and will proceed on to Denver or what. So after a few minutes, he decides he's got to figure out what's going on. He gets out. He notices a light in a building a little bit in distance. He goes in. There's a military policeman that's behind the desk there, and Sergeant Vincent says, "Hey, where am I?" And he says, "You're at Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico." So that pretty much shocks Sergeant Vincent, because that's about the last place that he expected. He thought he would be, obviously, in Denver. And the military policeman says to Sergeant Vincent, when Sergeant Vincent says, "Well, I need to go to the bus station because I need to get a bus. I'm trying to get back to Colorado Springs." And the military policeman, the dispatcher there, says, "No, the base is closed until further notice. Nothing's coming in and nothing's going out." Well, Sergeant Vincent says, "Well, we just came in. How could that be? We just flew in." And the military policeman said, "Well, I don't know anything about that, but the base is closed until further notice." So Sergeant Vincent, says, "All right, well, please just let me know, when that happens." And it wasn't until a few hours later, I believe it was like about around 9 p.m., maybe a little later than that, where he was advised that the base was now open, and so he was given directions to the bus station where he had called his wife and got on a bus that was headed for Colorado Springs. He would go all night on that bus and be picked up about 8:30 the next morning at Colorado Springs bus station by his wife, Bobby. So anyway, that's a strange story. He reveals it to his wife. They both agree that that's one of the weirdest things that, they've been exposed to in a long time. But he doesn't really think that much about it. I mean, it is what it is. It was an experience. Well, of course, all of the TV coverage that day, with the president being shot and killed the day before, all the TV coverage was about the assassination. And Lee Oswald starts appearing on TV in some of the news reports, and of course the midnight news conference that District Attorney Wade had. And all of a sudden, as soon as Sergeant Vincent sees Oswald on television, he says, "Oh my goodness, that's the guy," or "that's a splitting image of the guy that we picked up, the Caucasian guy in Dallas." And his wife, looks at him perplexed, because how could that be? Oswald was obviously in Dallas, and so was still in Dallas now, arrested, so how could that be? And he says, "I have no idea, but I'm telling you, this guy looked exactly like him." So, it goes on that week. They watch Ruby kill Oswald, and now they're really kind of worried because things are kind of escalating quickly with the whole Oswald thing. So they do a lot of discussions among themselves. They decide, hey, we don't know what's happening here, but it's better if we don't say anything. We have plans for life after the military, and we're going to just, let's just not talk about this anymore. And that's understandable in their situation. So all of a sudden after that, strange things seem to begin to happen. Number one, Sergeant Vincent already has the highest clearance that he can have in his position. And so he wouldn't have expected to get a new secrecy agreement to have to sign. But what happens is he gets a secrecy agreement not just for him, but for his wife, Bobby, which is really unusual. He's never heard of that. And when he asks around, no one else had ever heard of that either at the time. So he is asked to sign a whole new secrecy agreement, and his wife Bobby has to sign a secrecy agreement of her own. She's a little, she at first she doesn't want to do it, but then she, being someone that wants to go by the rules, she goes ahead and does it, signs the secrecy agreement for herself also. Well, then the next thing is, not long after that, they start getting inquiries from their neighbors saying, hey, what did you guys do? The CIA has been around here for the last week asking everybody all these questions about you guys. And they like, what? And they have no idea what's going on. They hadn't obviously done anything where it would require any kind of background that they knew of, so they didn't know what was happening. So then about May, as I said, about 4 months, after the assassination in that range, April, May, all of a sudden, Sergeant Vincent gets orders to report to Andrews Air Force Base. Isn't told who to see, is just told to call a number when he gets there, which is really strange for him. So anyway, he does as ordered. He goes, he reports to Andrews, he calls the number, he's told to report to a certain place. He and a few other people are picked up by a bus, and they go, and they find out that they're going to Langley, the CIA headquarters in Virginia. So over the next maybe 4 days, Sergeant Vincent is put through a whole battery of psychological tests and some physical tests also, but mostly psychological tests. And at the end of this time, he's called into a room where there's some folks sitting in chairs that he really can't see very well because they're actually dimly lit. So he thought that was really strange also. But what happens is they give him a really, really lucrative job offer. They want him to come work for them, the CIA. They give him a great job offer, very generous. And he really doesn't know what's going on, but he refuses the job offer because they have plans to get out of the military in a few years, and he's kind of got that on his mind. Plus, he loves living in Colorado Springs. That's kind of their dream area, so they're already there. So he doesn't want to make the move. Anyway, they try about 3 times to get him to accept this offer, but he refuses, and they finally relent and said, okay. He heads back to Colorado Springs, tells his wife, Bobby, about it. So, and they talk about it, and that's certainly strange, because really Sergeant Vincent at that time is really an administrative supervisor. He doesn't have any special skills that would necessarily relate to the CIA as you would think anyway, where it would be specialized skills. So anyway, what happens is about 6 weeks after that, he gets orders that he's not giving a choice. He's to report to ENT Air Base in Washington, D.C. He's being assigned there, and it's not a question. It's just an assignment that he has to take. So they're perplexed. They've got to sell the house. They've got to do a whole bunch of stuff. So what happens is, before he's to report to ENT Air Base in Washington, D.C., he's told not to report there. He's told to report to Las Vegas, to a motel in Las Vegas, and call a number, which is, again, just so strange. But anyway, he does it. He and Bobby, they leave, they get in, they go to this motel. He calls the number after, it actually took a couple of days to get things squared away, but he's told to, again, report to a certain area. He's picked up, and he's taken by the same type of plane, not a C-54, but a plane with the same insignia that he noticed in the plane that he took from Washington the day of the assassination, the globe on the colored background with the longitude and latitude signs. Well, he goes and they land at an air base about 40 miles outside of Las Vegas, and he's told right away that it's a CIA base, and it's the CIA base that most people commonly know as Area 51, where they're doing an awful lot of, all of the Blackbird and all of the U-2 stuff, and there's so much stuff that's going on there that's very secret. So it's highly, highly classified, everything that's out there. What a perfect place for the CIA to put someone that they're trying to keep an eye on. So, because obviously, as we'll talk about in a minute, they really probably were debriefed by the two guys that got on Dallas. Nobody probably realized he was even on that plane until that debriefing happened, and then they had to do a whole lot of research into who this guy was, and they realized that a lot of other potential witnesses to the assassination, the CIA wanted to keep a very, very close eye on him. So anyway, they give him the assignment. Again, he's an administrative supervisor, not anything that's, more exotic than that. And the fact is that because that base has the location that it does, most people that work there actually fly out on Sunday night and then they come back on Friday night, which is what he did most of the time. Sometimes he would come back just for the night on Wednesdays, but usually he was actually out at the air base for the entire week. So it was very, very easy to keep tabs on Sergeant Vincent. The home that they had in Colorado Springs, they got sold in one day. The CIA bought the home, and again, he was taken care of. He was when they actually retired. When he actually retired from the military, he said, and his wife said the same thing, that they felt like they were being kept in a plush prison. So it wasn't that they weren't getting paid well and they weren't getting perks and they weren't getting, it wasn't that it was not a pleasant experience, but they felt that it was a prison. That's how tightly their lives were controlled. Anyway, this goes on until he retires from the Air Force. He goes on to have a career outside of the Air Force, but he's under the secrecy agreements. And, this always sticks in the back of his mind what he experienced that day, the possibility in his mind of a second Oswald getting on that plane in Dallas. His wife and he talk about it, occasionally, but again, they agree that, it may be dangerous even to really, pursue it any further. Well, what happens is in the 1990s with the assassination records, AARB, the Record Review Board comes out, and it is anybody that's under a secrecy agreement of anything surrounding the Kennedy assassination is now freed from that secrecy agreement. So he had been thinking about this for a long time. The first thing that he did was he approached a television news anchor that he had a lot of confidence in because he had watched him a lot. This was in the Midwest, where he was living in Wichita at this time. And then from there, they wanted to make sure that, the secrecy agreement really was okay to put in the rearview mirror. So they went to a lawyer. The lawyer contacted one of the head liaisons between the AARB and Congress, and he was told that yes, it is okay to go ahead and tell what he knows. And then he went on to tell his story and actually wrote a book about it called Flight from Dallas. So really interesting, really interesting, this whole experience, because when you think about it, it fits right into the whole second Oswald scenario. There was a second, or it could have been more than just a second, could have been even more, but certainly someone was running around Dallas for the months before November 22nd, 1963, trying to draw attention to themselves, and this person looked the splitting image of Lee Oswald. And we have all of these examples. The Sportsdrome Shooting Center, where not once but twice people reported Oswald. They would later report a guy that looked like Oswald after the assassination as being the person that created a ruckus. So you have those sightings of a second Oswald. What did the Warren Commission do? It just pretended that they weren't there, which they did with all the evidence, for the most part, that didn't further their case. So they just disacknowledged it, if you will. There was a case in Morgan's gun shop where a gentleman was there with his brother-in-law and his sister, and there was a guy that they would say later looked exactly like Lee Oswald that was buying ammunition and was making all kind of a ruckus and drawing attention to himself, very impertinent and rude, and made sure that he let everybody know that he was an ex-Marine. The day, I believe it was the day after that, there was a sighting. There was a auto salesman at the downtown Lincoln Mercury dealership near Dealey Plaza. I believe the salesman's name was Guy Bogart, if I remember correctly, and he reported that Lee Oswald, a guy came in looking like Oswald, which he would report later, stated that his name was Lee Oswald, just actually used the name, so there's no question that he was trying to impersonate him or be an imposter, and then said that he was interested in a Red Mercury Comet. He didn't have the money for the down payment then, but he said he would have plenty of cash in a couple of weeks and that he would pay for the whole car then. The salesman Bogart agreed to let Oswald take a test drive, and as a lot of folks know, this so-called Oswald imposter drove kind of crazy on Stemmons Freeway, driving 80, 85 miles an hour, doing some crazy stuff, obviously trying to make sure that he was remembered. There were tons of other cases where there was a second Oswald that was reported. The Sylvia Odio situation, where Oswald and two other folks supposedly showed up at her door, and that whole conversation that took place. I won't get into that at this point. But again, just tons and tons of these sightings of who people later, after the assassination, would say was Lee Oswald, or if it wasn't, it was a splitting image of him. So the Sergeant Vincent flight from Washington, where they picked up someone that may have been an Oswald imposter, fits right in. Look what happened on the day of the actual assassination, how many other Oswalds were viewed. Number one, it starts right at the site of the assassination. Officer Roger Craig, as a lot of folks know, he's outside in Dealey Plaza. He's doing investigations. He hears a shrill whistle. He looks up, and there's a green Rambler station wagon that's heading west on Elm Street. The driver is kind of looking up the hill towards the book depository, and all of a sudden Craig sees this guy come down who he would later state was Lee Oswald, or a lookalike of Lee Oswald. He gets in the green Rambler station wagon, and they proceed west on Elm Street. Officer Craig tried to stop it, but he wasn't able to get over there in time to stop the car. But just a few hours later, after Lee Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater, brought back to the police headquarters, Officer Roger Craig, identified him as the guy that he saw get into the green Rambler station wagon. So it was just almost an immediate identification of Oswald from Officer Craig. Not only that, we know that there were two people that were arrested in the Texas Theater under the guise of having Lee Oswald arrested. We know that the actual Lee Oswald was arrested in the main level of the theater, and he was brought out the front of the theater where there's a lot of very famous photos that show him being arrested there and putting in a police car and taken off. But just 3 or 4 minutes after that, there's a second Oswald, a second guy that everyone says looks exactly like Lee Oswald. He's arrested in the balcony, or at least on the steps outside the balcony, and arrested and taken out the back of the Texas Theater. And Butch Burroughs, one of the employees of the Texas Theater, and a whole bunch of folks that are out there, shop owners and others, and they see this second Oswald being arrested in the rear door of the Texas Theater. And for years, most of them think that was the Lee Oswald, being arrested that everybody else knows came out the front. A few minutes after that, there's another Oswald sighting in the parking lot of the El Chico restaurant, which is just a few blocks from the Texas Theater. A group of people see who they will identify as Lee Oswald or Lee Oswald look-alike, and his behavior was so strange driving around that they actually came over and took the license plate down. And that license plate would then be traced back to Collins Radio. Collins Radio was a major contractor for the CIA. At the Tippit killing, at 10th and Patton Street, we know that some of the witnesses claim that they saw a Lee Oswald there. Well, some of the witnesses say that the folks that were involved didn't look like Oswald, but there were folks that said it looked like he was there. So anyway, we've got all of these sightings of Lee Oswald, a second Oswald, someone is obviously being set up. Lee Oswald is obviously being set up with someone being an imposter, at least one person impersonating Oswald over the months leading up to the assassination. How important were all of these second Oswald sightings? Extremely important. And if we would have had a real investigative body rather than the Warren Commission, all of these sightings would have been investigated in detail, and who knows how quickly we could have come to a real conclusion with the JFK assassination. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.